All right, good morning, folks. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So this is one part of multiple that we're going to be doing for you for ARC280 specifically. But this, if any of you guys are not in ARC280, it's kind of a general briefer of how to make models as well. But we will specifically be talking about the towers. So feel free to ask questions at the end. I think we're going to try to do like an hour and then leave half an hour, or I guess at this point, 20 minutes for questions. So I'm Lily. I'm the studio technologist. If you guys haven't met Gabe yet, he's also a studio technologist. So both of us are at the studio help desks, either on the southwest corner of grad studio or northwest corner of undergrad studio. Do you want to say anything else? Just say hi.
Hi.
Okay, so this is how to build amazing towers. All right, so there's going to be 3 sections today. I guess I'll use this thing. So we'll just talk about materials because I know that a lot of us are just kind of used to grabbing whatever type of wood and whatever type of paper is available in recycling, but it's really good to understand them very well so that you choose the right one. And then next is techniques and tools to cut those specific materials with. And then lastly, how to assemble the floor slabs and columns of your tower. Okay, but before we actually get into the workshop, we want to really stress scheduling. So all the staff at Daniels in the workshop, as well as us, only work Monday to Friday. So if you're banking on going to the shop for advice or to buy materials on the weekend, don't do that. And yeah, just make sure you don't do what I've shown in that previous screen and do something more like this. So model making always takes at least double the amount of time that you think, because when you're doing things in real life, not in Rhino, things will inevitably mess up, right? Like you might break something and then you have to do it all over again, or glue takes longer to dry than you think. So again, even if it seems like a very simple thing in your mind, give you budget like double the time, and always build in rest time as well, because that way you can kind of bleed into rest time, and hopefully also get a bit of proper rest. All right. Oh, shoot, I didn't put a picture of us. I just wanted to stress that the folks in the workshop in the basement, as well as Gabe and I and our whole studio team of work studies, were very, very willing to help and very knowledgeable, and we're friendly. So do come approach us after the workshop. Can I get a show of hands to see who knows this resource called the Studio Ecosystem Mural Board? Awesome. Okay, those who don't, I really recommend you check it out. It's kind of like a pseudo website that's very visual and has just tons of information in it. You're going to want to keep it bookmarked. If you know about those orange model tags in Studio at the back, it's kind of like a business card. There's the links to this page, and I'll send you guys the link to this presentation so you don't have to take pictures or anything. You can just jump right into this afterwards. So in this resource I'm talking about, there are details about each of these common materials that you would use. So like, where do you recycle it? Is it laser cuttable? Do we sell it at Daniels? If not, where else can you buy it? And there's also like a Google map of different shops around downtown Toronto that sell these materials. So do check that out. So the shop, which is the workshops shop that sells materials in the basement, is open the same time as the workshop is. So again, Monday to Friday. But aside from the shop, again, there's like, you know, for example, things like fabric or which you don't need for this. But next assignment, when you have building envelopes and a lot of your towers are curvy, so you're going to want to use flexible materials, things like fabric, we don't stock in the workshop, right? Or again, specialty woods and stuff like that. So yeah, check out this Google map that will show you where to buy that stuff. Ooh, why is this janky? Okay, so we're gonna kind of split up your model into three parts. You have your columns. This is an example of how not to do your columns. I'll get more into that later. You have your envelope, which we won't actually talk about this round. We'll just touch on it. And then your floor slabs. So for columns, you're gonna want to use sticks. They can come in the form of round or square or rectangular, or if you want to make your own other extrusions. And just know that, again, aside from what we sell here, there's so many different like sizes, materials, flexibilities. And so if you don't like what's available here, like don't box yourself in to think, okay, I gotta like use this particular material, go look up elsewhere. And you can also make your own dowels. This is something I really recommend. Actually, maybe Gabe can pass around. Yeah. So that's a sampler pack of dowels that you can make by taking sheets of wood and then cutting them into like smaller strips, right? So often when the dowels are all sold out and stuff, you should totally make your own. And that way you can get the right size that you need as well. And then flat sheets are what you're going to use for the slabs. I wish this thing stayed up better. Support here. And same thing. Yeah, I think it's just kind of loose. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I don't think it stays very well. Thank you, though. Yeah, so I'll just go get more into this later, and you can look back at this presentation to see like these little names of each material here. That thing. That's fine. Maybe I'll just hold it. And then again, flexible sheets are what you're going to want to use for the next assignment. Great. But we won't worry about it too much at this point, but this is just kind of a teaser. That is the fun part. So yeah, next assignment will be a fun workshop. Okay, so aside from the dowels that are being passed around, we're also going to pass around a couple different like packs of materials. And I want you to really closely take a look at these because often folks will kind of reach for like a translucent sheet, but they won't realize that there's a difference between, for example, trace paper, which is paper and very rippable and stuff, versus mylar. That's the stuff you plot with in the IT room. Mylar is actually plastic. So when you recycle it, you should put it in the plastic bins, not the blue bins. And so mylar is very strong. And so when you cut shapes into it, even if you have really thin pieces, it's going to stay intact, whereas tracing paper will like just kind of crumble. Another example of things folks get confused often is millboard and paper, also called paperboard, chipboard, all sorts of different names. It's basically just like dense paper. And then MDF, which is wood. So they look super similar because all it is like very small fibers that are put together in different ways, but there's a difference. MDF is more expensive. It's stronger, and so it's harder to cut by hand, which for this round you guys have to do. You can't laser cut, right? Whereas, yeah, millboard is really easy to cut with an X-Acto knife. Also, millboard you can laser cut in their next round, whereas MDF is banned. So yeah, another one, basswood versus Baltic birch ply sheets. If you like really look closely at plywood, it's made of multiple plies, so layers of wood, right? And so plywood is really great because each layer, wood has a grain direction. And so it's layering like opposite directions of wood. So it becomes very flat and even and strong in multiple directions. Whereas basswood, which we also sell downstairs, is just like cut from a tree, right? It's a solid piece of wood. So only has one grain direction, which means it's a bit weaker, but that means it's easier for us to cut by hand. Yeah, okay, so when we're choosing materials, always remember to think about your scale first, right? Because everything has a thickness in real life, okay? So you don't have to be, I think, that accurate for this assignment. No one's going to measure and be like, ooh, you're a millimeter off from your, actual building and like dock marks or anything like that. But generally, you want to pick materials of the right thickness that's proportional to your real life model scale. So maybe you have to layer multiple, pieces or like pick bigger size dowels. I do want to mention sometimes when I say layer things, folks end up, thinking they're going to spend their time like gluing multiple sheets of wood because you can't find the right thickness of wood. This is not a good idea because laminating, which is what you call like having stacks of sheets, laminating materials is not an easy task. It takes a really long time and a lot of skill. Like you gotta really brush on your specific glue and clamp it and wait. It's just not fun. So try to just buy the right thickness instead of wasting your energy doing that. And again, with dowels, if you can't find the right size, just go make your own. So shop folks can help you do that. All right, so next I'm gonna turn on my phone here and start doing some demos for you. Also, if anyone has like questions throughout, you can feel free to ask him or you can ask him at the end, okay? Okay, let's work. All right, hopefully that's good. Okay, so techniques and tools, same thing. We've got them in this Studio ecosystem link. So really recommend you checking it out because there's specific recommendations of like, even X-Acto knives, there's different types. There's like the slidey ones versus this round, like rotationally tightening one, which is way better because it's more rigid. So we have specific recommendations for you guys like that. And all these different types of glues and different types of rulers and stuff, same thing. So if you want kind of like a starter pack of tools that you're gonna use in architecture school and afterwards, won't be a waste of money, even if say you leave architecture school or whatever, these are tools that are always going to come in handy. So we do recommend that you buy your own X-Acto knife if you don't have one, a corked backed metal ruler, one of these little razor saws they're called, and miter box that comes with it, a cutting mat so that you don't destroy your table, and it also helps preserve your tool because if you're cutting on like concrete, you're going to dull the blade a lot, right? And masking tape. So these are things that we have at the studio help desks as well that you can borrow. So you can give us your T card for the day and lend out a tool for a day at a time. But again, these are kind of basic things that you should really get your own, and they're not very expensive either. Whereas there are some more specialized tools, right? Like I don't think all of you guys need a saw or one of these rotary knives. So we'll just get into some of these different tools in depth. Again, you can come back here and like read the descriptions if you want to know what these tools are. Okay, so the number one cause of accidents in the workshop, in the studio, anywhere is the utility knife, right? Not the big like power saws and stuff. Always, there's like every couple of weeks a utility knife accident. So gonna do this demo for you. All right, so first step is you're gonna make sure the tip of your blade is sharp. Hold on. Bear with me while I be a boomer about this. Yeah, I know. Okay. Well, you can barely see this, but you have to make sure the tip is sharp because if it's not and it's dull, right, you're going to be pushing really hard to cut through because it's not a very good knife. And that's when accidents happen, right? When you're exerting a lot of force, you tend to like slip like that and have poor control of your hands. So the secret to X-Acto knives actually is you have to use very little pressure, right? Like so gentle like this, because that way you can have really good control over it to the point where you could cut straight lines like without even a ruler. Okay, so in order for you to have a sharp blade, oh, I forgot to bring my pliers today. So you could borrow pliers from us. So they kind of look like this. And you would grab the tip and just snap it back. But if you don't have pliers, I actually prefer this method. You just take something to like cover the tip of your blade. You're going to line up the lines on your blade with this metal piece. And then just cover the tip with something like a book, a piece of wood, so that it doesn't happen to fling off. And then you'll just tilt it to snap it back on the table. Easy, right? And then this you can put away in the yellow, there's these like sharp containers all around Studio. They're yellow, so easy to find. Make sure you do that right away so that you don't accidentally cut yourself on this. Okay, so I'm at the end of my blade here. If you guys are running out of a blade, come to the Studio Help Desk. We have extras, so you can just swap for a whole new one, okay? And yeah, we provide this for free because it's really important that you have sharp blades. So I don't want you to be like, I'm gonna cheap out and like use this dull blade as long as possible. Don't do that. It's okay that I'm at the end of this blade here because you don't want it to stick out any more than this. Jay Pooley, one of the instructors, always says in his intros, only have as much of the blade sticking out as you want sticking into your body, which is how it goes, right? Often folks will have it extended really long, but that does two things. When it's longer, it's flexible and like doesn't cut us straight. And then two, it's very dangerous. So this is as much as you want it. And then you'll tighten that. If at any point you feel nervous using the X-Acto knife because you're sleep deprived, you're not focused, or you just want to be extra safe, there's also cut resistant gloves that we have that you could borrow at the help desks. We'll get this down eventually by the end. Okay, next thing is the ruler. So always make sure you have a cork back ruler if you can, because that prevents it from sliding around. If you don't, and you just have like a regular slidey ruler, you can just use masking tape to either like put it on the face. That just gives you a bit more friction, right? Or you can be like extra thoughtful and tape your ruler down to your piece. That'll help prevent it from sliding at all. So that's a really good technique. And yeah, don't use non-metal rulers because if you have a plastic one or wood or something, the knife will cut into the ruler itself, right? So metal is the best. Okay, so cardboard is probably the thing most of you will be using the most for this project. So let me just demo this tape technique. So if I taped it on the side here and I'm like kind of pushing into it to the right like this, super secure, right? So you're putting a lot of force into the ruler, not into your hand again. So you can butt the side of your knife into the ruler and you're going to make multiple very shallow, gentle passes until you cut all the way through. Okay, instead of trying to cut all in one go. And yeah, same thing. I'll just kind of show you how you do curves. If you're not putting a lot of pressure in, it's so easy, right? So yeah, a little patience and like being gentle with your knife is so key to cutting well with the X-Acto knife. I think that's the one mistake a lot of folks make. All right, now saws. the main thing about saws is clamping things down. So just like we did with this ruler, where you like use a tape or use your hands and make sure it's got friction, clamping and like keeping things in control is key, right? If you're using this miter box and cutting these, and you're just kind of cutting like that, there's a lot of energy wasted with things sliding around and you trying to like keep things still. These are designed so that this little lip here and put against the side of your table, right? So you're kind of like pushing into the table and then using your fingers as a clamp for your piece of wood. If you have, a bigger, thicker piece of wood, so the reason this is designed this way is because the miter box here is meant for like a bunch of really like tiny, easy cuts. So you don't want to waste time like clamping things when you're gonna like cut next. But if you're using this for something thicker that's taking a long time, like I showed in this image here, make sure you, oops, you guys can barely see that. You can clamp the box down, right? You can clamp your piece of wood down. That way your hands are free to focus on sawing. Okay, clamping is such a good hack. And the thing about clamping to remember as well. All right. If you clamp things on one side, that's like a pivot point. So you always want to have things clamped in two spots so that it doesn't pivot. And then another thing is often folks will be like, great, I clamped it. Now I'm going to start sawing. And then there's like a lot of vibration. You want to clamp things as close to where you're cutting as possible. That makes sense, right? If I clamp it really securely here and I'm cutting out here, this is jiggling a lot. Okay, so even with saws, this is the one that you're going to be using probably the most, we're most familiar with. But if we examine this saw a bit, so it's got really tiny teeth to the point where you can't see it on screen, right? And that's because tiny teeth means it's going to make like a bunch of tiny cuts. So it'll be very like fine and precise and smooth. Whereas if you see the bigger saws down in the workshop, those are meant to like rip out more chunks of wood at a time. So they're faster, but they're rougher. Okay, so again, this tiny thing is great for tiny dowels, but it'll take you a really long time if you're trying to get through anything thicker than like, yeah, these. So yeah, just check out, oh, another thing is, see this like backing here? That keeps it rigid. So again, this is specialized for straight cuts. Whereas other saws, like this one, right? It doesn't have a back. It's flexible because it's meant to like cut off things sticking out of the surface of something. And it's also got slightly bigger teeth because it's meant for wood, which is like harder. And another saw. This one I want to show you. Same thing, like pretty decently sized teeth, but the actual saw blade itself is so skinny. And so when it's skinny, it means it's flexible, not good for straight cuts. So it's naturally meant for like curvy cuts, right? I'll show you an example, I think, yeah. So yeah, take a look at the teeth too. They like slant in a specific direction. So for like this one, the teeth are bent backwards. So in one direction, it'll cut very smoothly, but in the other, it's like gonna grab and kind of tend to get stuck. So if you're sawing and you feel like you're getting stuck, try just cutting in one direction, like either just pushing or just pulling, and then see which one is smoother and which one you like better. I think something else I want to demo is often I see people doing this, like a lot of back and forth to cut. So that's wasting your energy. You want to do like longer strokes so that you're using all the teeth in the saw to cut and you're like using your muscles less. What else? And then another trick to minimize this thing called tear out. So as you're cutting on the back surface, when you finish your cut, it's going to kind of pop out, right? And then the wood will splinter at the back. So if you don't want that and you want to keep it neat, you can just kind of take your X-Acto knife and score a line at the back, or put some tape at the back to reduce that the end grain from spitting out. Otherwise, you'll maybe spend more time sanding it after. So it depends what you want to, spend your energy on. Okay. Yeah, right. So this just kind of shows you all these knives and saws are the same thing. Saws are just a bunch of like X-Acto knives put together. But even for knives, if you check out those like tiny precision X-Acto knives versus the wider yellow utility knives, based on what I just told you, you can guess that the utility knives are better for straight cuts, right? Because they're wider, rigid, gonna flex less, whereas these pointed ones are good for like curves. So choose your tool based on what you're doing. Yeah, and then I already covered the saws. Okay, so good hack for cutting slabs without a laser cutter is you're gonna print out your pieces on paper, cut it out with scissors or what have you, and then glue it onto your sheet. So I did that on this piece of cardboard. And such an important thing to apply everywhere is be thoughtful about how you nest stuff. So if you put each piece separately on your sheet, there's going to be a total of 36 cuts you have to make. And this is going to be more painful for you when you're doing it by hand and less obvious with the laser cutter. But same thing with the laser cutter. If you have pieces sharing lines, it reduces from, 36 to 27 cuts. And that will make a big difference once you're doing more. This is just for 7 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. Yes. When you're doing like the 20 or 30 that you guys have, that's going to exponentially save you time. So yeah, that's what I did. I cut out these pieces here. Let's say I need to cut one more and more. I'm not going to float that in the middle of the sheet. I'm going to be lazy about it and probably use these 2 sides, which are already there for me, and then just need to do 1, 2 more cuts, right? So if you just get a cheap glue stick, put a bit of glue on the back so that it's not permanent. Put it on your sheet. Cut it out. I'm going to try to attempt without a ruler for one side and then with a ruler for the other to show you. All right, so once you cut it out, you can just remove the piece of paper without marring your surface. So that's a lot easier than having to draw it out, right? Or like do angle measurements and stuff like that. Oh, okay. And another tip that I think I want to stress is something called overcutting, like on the corners. When you're doing like squares or something like that. Often folks have a tendency to like cut just close to the tip, but not quite because you don't want to like mess up your piece. But truly, if you overcut a little bit, it's not very visible and it'll just save you the grief of like having to go back and then recut the corners. And then it kind of ends up ripping the corner after and it almost becomes messier. So yeah, overcutting is something that people do a lot for manual model making. Okay, wait, did I skip one? No, I didn't. Oh, yes, I did. Okay, so for cutting dowels, you're gonna have a kind of different slew of tools. You could use your utility knife, but when you're cutting wood, which is obviously harder than paper or thicker things, it'll take you a lot more time. It's doable, but depends. So mostly you'll be using your razor saw, but there's also tools that you could borrow from the help desks that just let you snip your piece, kind of like this. Oops. But when you do that, you're kind of compressing the fibers of your wood. And so it's not a very clean cut. So you might have to finish it off by filing or sanding afterwards. So again, just depends what you prefer spending your time doing. So let's see if I can. Yeah, when you're not using your X-Acto knife, make sure it's closed, eh? So this is a sample that we'll pass around to you in a sec, but when you're putting together your tower like this, you want each floor to be evenly spaced. So it's a very, very key aspect of model making to make spacers. So you can go down to the shop and just quickly like zip through some random scraps of wood to make a bunch of spacers of the same height, or you can use a hot wire cutter and make them out of foam, same thing. Foam is a bit more like not as much longevity to it, but yeah, if the shop is closed and you just want to use foam, that's fine too. Or you could even take like a bunch of pieces of cardboard and then double-sided tape them together, right, to make these stacks. So yeah, after you put your spacers in, what am I showing here? Then you put your dowels in. So for cutting dowels, again, the shop is a really good tool because you can use their power saws to quickly zip through, a bunch of sticks very, very quickly. But if you don't have access to that, the miter box is going to be your best friend. So if you're cutting a bunch of the same dimension over and over, instead of marking them, with your ruler and then drawing a line a million times, you can just make what's called a jig. Jigs are just devices that help you do like a repetitive or like a specific thing very well. So the jig can be very complex or it can be very simple. So for example, you can take a spacer, take some double-sided tape, tape it to your miter box. Then when you butt your dowel up to that jig, this will be the dimension that you cut every time, right? So you cut this one, and then next, cut the next one, and you don't have to measure, and they'll all be the same. Or you could even take a piece of tape and like mark it on here and eyeball it as well. Yeah, basically just make sure you work smarter, not harder. Don't waste time measuring things if you don't have to. Another thing about cutting dowels, and I'll demo this one. So it's really hard to see on the screen, I think, so I won't even show you or on the camera. But if you're cutting through the backside, same thing, will always splinter out. So to prevent that, you can put a little bit of love into it in the beginning. So you can kind of like cut all along around the circumference, I guess. So rotating, just like mark just a little bit so that the fibers on like the outer edge of the like outer face of the dowels are cut. I hope that makes sense to you guys. And then once you go all the way around, then you can just cut all the way through and then you'll have a nice clean end. If those dowel samples are going around, you could see one edge was cut to pop out and the other edge was cut using this technique. So yeah, you can see a really big difference. All right, so once you have your pieces ready, we get to assembly. So a big issue we've seen in previous years is folks will cut all these pieces of dowels and then glue them incorrectly. What I'm saying by that is you have to remember you're building a building at the end of the day. And there's basic physics where forces run like along these columns. So if your columns are like not underneath the next, they're not supporting the weight of the previous floor properly. So just make sure that your elevator core, I don't know if you guys have to do that, and your like ancillary columns are all lined up vertically, right? So it doesn't have to be straight. Even this one here, the structure is like on the outer envelope, and obviously it's curving, but they're all connected, right? Yeah, so there's kind of two ways to add structure. You can have long dowels that go all the way through your floor slabs, which have holes in them, right? Or you can have a bunch of small dowels that are glued like to the bases of your floor slabs. So I always recommend the going through floor slabs method when you can, because it's going to be less work, less cutting of dowels if you have access to like a laser cutter, but it becomes kind of tricky once you're hand cutting, because hand cutting square holes or just holes at all is tricky. So I'll talk about that a bit more. So again, try maybe playing around with both and then figure out which one you prefer. In the next iteration, definitely when you have access to laser cutters, do this. But for this one, I don't know, I'll leave it to you to decide. But yeah, I just wanted to show you. So these are all models of the same building called the Sendai Mediatek. It's a library. There's a million different ways to visually represent your like one same building, right? So you can decide if it's going to be, yeah, like little columns in between or long columns going through. And the nice thing about this is you're in your initial phase, so you can decide if they're round columns or square columns. That's up to you. So square columns we recommend normally because they'll prevent, if it fits properly, they'll prevent you from like putting your floor slabs in the wrong like rotation, right? They'll automatically help you puzzle piece everything together correctly. Whereas, yeah, with round dowels, it's you're gonna have to rely on your glue to keep things together a particular way. So yeah, then we come to the problem of hand cutting square holes. So I did a lot of square hole cutting to try to see if there's any easier way to do it. Long story short, not really. You could look for a specialty tool that like punches out square holes, but we don't really have them here, and they're really, really expensive and stuff. So it's just not a good option. So long story short, you would just use the X-Acto knife and make 4 cuts. It's not that hard. You could see in the picture here, I overcut corners on purpose too, to like speed things up a bit. But it is more work than say making circular holes with like a hole puncher. Hole punchers are the best for cardboard, but the only issue is they don't have a very deep like throat. So you can't hole punch, you can only hole punch around the edge, not like in the middle. So other ways to do it are with X-Acto knives again, or a variety of tools. So I'm gonna sample some of them out for you. Oh, and yeah, even if you have square dowels, like columns, because in your design, maybe it's important that it's square, that's okay. You could put square dowels into round holes as well. Might not feel satisfying, but it's, again, for an initial like first stage prototype model, not bad. Okay, so oops. This is supposed to be a photo of this. So yeah, first step, as I talked about, make spacers. Next step, you'll glue things together. So, sorry, let me go back. I'm gonna do a couple like demos for you showing how to cut holes. Okay, so we're gonna pass these around. But I'll just talk about it. So yeah, like you can see the hole puncher, nice and clean, but it's got its limitations. This was an X-Acto knife technique, which I'll show you right now. So I'm using the like fine tipped X-Acto brand knife here and gonna like kind of poke a bunch of little cuts together in a circle. Oh my gosh. I guess part of this demo is showing you how tedious and hard it is. It takes a while, but you know, you'll get pretty decently clean holes. Because even if it doesn't look so good, you have to remember, you know, your columns and glue are gonna kind of fill the gap and hide some of the imperfections as well. Okay, so that's one method, but a faster method, especially if you have a bunch of things stacked and you just want to drill a hole through all of them, is if you take them all, clamp it with like a piece of wood on top and below. Let me just do that right now. Clamps are also something you can borrow. And remember, we talked about clamping as close to where you're cutting as possible. So here, right around the hole so that it's tight right there. And then you can actually drill through cardboard, paper, etc. So this bit that I'm using in particular is called a brad point bit. There's lots of different types of bits, but this one is like really pointy and sharp and meant for wood, as opposed to some other bits that are a bit more dull, to be more general purpose for other materials. So I recommend this one. Here. So another nice thing about having wood underneath is you can tell when you cut all the way through because you're going to see sawdust come up. So that means you've reached the wood. Oh. Oops, went through multiple layers. So yeah, again, not as clean as maybe using the X-Acto knife, but it's fast, right? And you can align everything all at once. So up to you how much you want to prioritize speed versus how it looks, etc. So yeah, I'll have Gabe pass around these hole samplers to you guys. Oh, I didn't bring it. Another technique you could use is if you have like a little, what's called a diamond file. So it looks like this. This one. You can like poke through your piece and then go around and like file the hole bigger. So you can try borrowing one of those from us and see if you like that. And then here's another one I kind of came up with while working on this presentation. So if you mark an X, oops, mark an X, which is pretty quick to do. And then take your dowel and poke it through. That works pretty quickly, but obviously you have these little like flanges sticking out. You could then go in and chop the flanges off too. That's actually pretty decent. And in the samples we're passing around, I just labeled that as X poke. I don't know if I discovered this method or if it's something other folks do, but this is not bad and pretty quick as well. but it does require you to have this like mini side snip tool thing. So we have a handful of these at the help desk that you can borrow and use. But yeah, only a handful. So if you do want to go buy your own pair of this, that method works really well, I think. Oh, oops. Okay, so yeah, once you have things cut out, the last step will just be gluing things together. So I just spewed a bunch of information here about lots of different types of glues, not saying that you should use these, at least for this model. The ones that you should use are glue stick, as I mentioned, definitely for printing out your shapes onto your piece temporarily as a I guess a guide. The glues you do want to use probably are PVA glues. So you probably don't hear it referred to it as this because often we talk about Weld Bond. That's a brand that is very good. Or like Elmer's white school glue. So all of these are actually more or less the same thing. So they're based off of a PVA polyvinyl acrylate, which is just like, I guess, the main chemical that you use in it. But each different company has different formulations. So some of them are like thicker, more viscous. Others are like yellow and then it dries clear after. They just kind of have certain niche uses. But long story short, all of them are flexible when they dry. So it's not gonna like, when you drop your piece of wood, it won't like crack at the joint. It's very strong. It's really good for porous materials like wood or paper. So it like soaks into the fibers to like really get that hold. And it's water soluble. So afterwards you can clean it up from your table, hands, whatever, with some water, or you could even dilute it with water. Okay, and non-toxic. So these are really good and they have a long set time. So after you like put in your spacers and then put the columns where you want them, you can dab the glue, like hold it in place, get it just right, and then leave it to set. Whereas the other popular glue would be CA glue, which you've probably heard it referred to as super glue or crazy glue or Bob Smith glue. Again, they're kind of all the same thing. Yeah, but they're very, very quick. When you're using super glue, do borrow gloves from us. They're these like disposable nitrile gloves. They're like latex gloves, but not latex because some folks are allergic to latex. But yeah, this will protect your fingers from getting stuck to your model. So yeah, obviously super glue, I think everyone's kind of familiar with, but just know that it works differently from the PVA glue, right? So it's going to be a brittle joint where it can kind of snap and crack at the joint. So basically the PVA glues are better. It just takes longer. Hot glue is also a tool that a lot of profs frown at because often it's used in the messy way where there's lots of stringing, but if you use it well and very precisely, it could be a really quick solution. Yeah, so these, again, don't really apply to you guys, but if you were ever curious about the difference between all these things, feel free to read through. And it also says whether we sell it here in the workshop or not. Okay, so the last thing we've got here is tape. I want to cover as well because tape is super handy. I see folks using painter's tape and masking tape interchangeably. I just wanted to like share with you the difference. Masking tape is generally what you want to use. Painter's tape is for painting. And that's because it's like they're more expensive. They have slightly different like formulations of adhesives so that it can stay on your wall as you're painting for like weeks. And then after, when you peel it off, it doesn't leave a residue or something, right? So we generally don't need that, right? Because you need it for models, not for painting walls. And masking tape is a fraction of the price. So just want to point that out. Oh, and a hot tip for using masking tape. Let's say you're using it to, hold your ruler down to your cardboard, right? Sorry. It's pretty, it's a pretty good in between, like between sticking well and not peeling off too much, but sometimes it does peel off paper. So what you could do to make it less sticky is kind of like put it on your arm to pick up some of your skin oils, put it on like other things to pick up dust so that it's a bit less sticky. Say if you're, yeah, just kind of need it for temporary adhesion. Double-sided clear tape is really like such a good resource. Yeah, like for this, I just used a tiny thin piece of double-sided tape. But unless I pried it off with my hands like that, it's really strong. And there's a lot of different types of double-sided tape as well. Some of them are stronger than others. So make sure you read the labels. In fact, some double-sided tapes are so strong. Maybe you guys have used foam tape before at home to like stick a hook on the wall or something, and then the foam tape never comes off and you have to scrape it off. Yeah, so again, lots of different grades of it. This foamy stuff called VHB, which means very heavy bond. We have some of it that you guys can use as well. It's used for construction. Like when you want to put handles on a clear glass door, and so you can't use screws or something, often construction workers just use a bit of VHB and it's stuck on there forever. So yeah, there's like weak and strong tape, all different like clarities and thicknesses of it. So pick the one that works for you. And yeah, okay, I think we're at an hour now. So I'll stop right there. There's a couple extra slides and stuff. If you guys want to look through in your own time, they just describe different materials in more detail. And they also have links for like playlists and stuff talking about all these. We didn't go into different varieties of wood as much because I really don't think you should be cutting wood for this model. Because yeah, cutting it like by hand is going to take forever. And if you do have workshop access, that will also probably take a long time and it's very busy in there. So long story short, wood is great and we'll get more into it in the next workshop, but really wanted to focus on soft materials like foam core, hardboard, paperboard, all of that good stuff. Okay, does anyone have questions? I know it's weird that we're in principal hall and it feels formal, but yeah, please feel free to ask questions. And I'm going to check the chat. Yeah. Ooh, both. I actually think foam core is easier because corrugated cardboard has the corrugations. So it's just kind of uneven and like erratic as you're cutting. But the only thing with foam core is that, well, I actually like foam core. Everyone says it's an unsustainable material, which it is in the sense that it's a composite. So it's foam in the middle and paper on the outside. So anytime you have mixed materials, you can't recycle it. But to be honest, a lot of what we recycle in the city, in the school, doesn't get recycled anyway. You know, if you have a whole bin of paper recycling and then someone puts their lunch in it, the whole thing's gone. And so like a huge, like more than 50% of recycling doesn't get recycled. So I don't think sustainability is just about recycle or not. It's more about what material makes the most sense in this application. So yeah, if foam core is gonna work better for you, then all the power to you. But yeah, it's like, it's a bit easier to see imperfections in foam core, I think, right? Because it's, you know, like the edges of cardboard are already a bit like cardboardy as it is. So if you don't cut perfectly, no one will really notice. Whereas foam core is so pristine and white, but you can dent it really easily with your fingers, right? And it's hard to like cover up. So that's the only thing about foam core. I see people with a lot of messy foam core models. But again, if you do the multiple light scoring through, you can get nice clean edges. You just have to be a bit more careful when you're, you can't like hide imperfections as well. Yeah. No, because again, yeah, hot wire, it's just a really thin, hot thing that melts foam, but paper doesn't melt like that, right? Yeah.
Edges? So I think practice with it, because definitely foam core will show imperfections, but corrugated cardboard will also like have more material in the way of cutting. And so if your knife isn't sharp enough, or if you have a very subtle curve, you're gonna kind of pick up a lot of bumps. That's my opinion.
I think there was another question at the back. No? Yeah. Sorry, I totally can't hear you. You kind of heard.
Just if you have any other more recommendations for cutting curves and whether it's a good idea to be using curves for this assignment when it's hand cutting, or if we should stick with something more angular, geometric.
Yeah, I mean, this first assignment, I think they're going to be understanding about the model. So I wouldn't worry too much about this limiting your design. And curves are great, right? I think they're not to be avoided because of these limitations. So again, even curves, if you do the correct X-Acto knife technique, they're not hard at all. You just kind of need to, take your time, be alert. And like, if you're worried about cutting your hands while you're doing complex curves too, again, we have so many gloves that you can borrow. Yeah, try it out. It's not hard. Actually, it's only hard because people do the wrong technique and they push really hard and then end up getting all jagged edges. Yeah, so same thing. Foam core will be like easier to cut. I just, for whatever reason, see folks not using it well, and there's a lot of messy foam core models, but if you do it very carefully, I think it'll work well. Anyone else, any questions? Can we borrow the gloves overnight or extended period of time? Yeah, so someone asked about how long to borrow tools for. Because the tools here are shared by everybody, we try to limit everyone to just like taking it for a day at a time and not hogging it. So yeah, you can borrow overnight, like we close at 5-ish. So if you borrow them around 5, you can keep it overnight and then return it the next day. It's really just about being courteous and like not hogging it longer than you need it for all the tools. Any other questions? If not, we can also just like talk about wood or something. Yeah, or we can just kind of end it here. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
What tips do you have for bending like softwood? Like if you want to use like softwood, what material do you think is the best one? And how could we bend it more than like the original like bending ability?
Yeah. So that's for future assignments maybe, right? Okay, cool. Yeah. Oh man, it's going to be fun. We will go through it more at the next ones because I don't want to overwhelm you guys for this round. You really should just focus on just slabs and columns, but there's lots of different ways to bend wood and weave wood to make like, I haven't finished the presentation yet, but yeah, like just, make really fun facades. But again, that's like a whole other territory. So generally for bending wood, if you add moisture and heat, it helps soften up the fibers. So that's something that we'll get more into.
I mean, I'll answer it quickly. Like when I was in school, I put like wood sheets over a kettle as it's boiling. But that can be dangerous. You can burn yourself. It might oversteam. It might not set it properly. So there's no one answer. But the concept of adding moisture, kind of give it a flexibility, is good. But different woods, like basswood, wouldn't bend the same way as a hardwood. So we'll get into more detail.
All right. Anyone else? For online folks, were you able to hear and see everything properly? Sorry if not. But yeah, we will have, as Gabe mentioned, all the material samples that he put together available at the help desks for you guys to come sift through and look at and ask more questions. And yeah, good luck. All right. Yeah, I guess we'll leave it at that. Thanks, everybody.